Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out Longfellow's Ballads. I read this last week, but apparently I had the mute button on. Combined with all this, we have numerous points of beauty, apparently insulated, but all aiming the main effect of inspiration. The heart is stirred, and the mind does not lament its malinstruction. The meter is simple, sonorous, well balanced, and fully adapted to the subject. Upon the whole, there are fewer poems than this. It is but one defect, an important one. The prose remarks prefacing the narrative are really necessary, but every work of art should contain within itself all that is requisite for its own comprehension. And this remark is especially true of the ballad. In poems of magnitude, the mind as the reader is not at all times enabled to include in one comprehension survey the proportions and proper adjustment of the whole. If is pleased, if at all, with particular passages, the sum of the pleasure is compounded with the sum of the pleasurable sentiments inspired by these individual passages in the progress of perusal. But in pieces of less extent, the pleasure is unique in the proper acceptance of this term. The understanding is employed without difficulty in the contemplation of the picture as a whole, and thus its effects will depend in great measure upon the perfection of its finish, upon the nice adaptation of its constituent parts, and especially upon what is right termed by Schlegel an unity of totality of interest. But the practice of prefixing exemplary passages is utterly at variance with such unity. By the prefix, we either put in possession of the subject of the poem, or some hint, historic fact, or suggestion of whereby afforded, not included the body of the piece, which without the hint is incomprehensible. In the latter case, while perusing the poem, the reader must revert in mind at least to the prefix for the necessary explanation. In the former, this poem is being paraphrased of the prefix. The interest is divided between the prefix and the paraphrase. In either instance, the totality of effect is destroyed. Perhaps the most worst specimen of the obtrusion is given to us in the poet in Blind Bartimaeus and the Goblet of Life, where it will be observed that the sole interest of the upper current in meaning depends upon the relation of reference to the under. If we read upon the surface what be vortex e praetera nihil in default of the moral beneath, the Greek finales of Blind Bartimaeus and the affection altogether inexcusable. What the small second-handed gibberish pedantry of Byron introduced is unworthy the limitation of Longfellow. Or the translation, we scarcely think it necessary to speak at all. We regret that our poet will persist in busying himself about such matters. This time might be better employed in original composition. Most of these versions are marked with the error upon which we have commented. The error is, in fact, essentially Germanic. The Luck of Edenhall, however, is a truly beautiful poem. We say that this, with all that deference with the opinion of the Democratic Review demands, the composition appears to us one of the very finest. If it has all free, hearty, obvious movements of true ballad legend, the greatest force of language is combined with it in the richest imagination, acting upon the most legitimate province. Upon the whole, we prefer it even to the sword song of Corner. The pointed moral with which it terminates is too exceedingly natural, so perfectly fluent from the incidents, we have hardly heart to pronounce it an ill taste. We have observed of this ballad in conclusion that its subject is more physical than is usual in Germany. Its images are rather in physical than in moral beauty, and this tendency in song is the true one. It is chiefly, are not mistaken, it is chiefly aims, forms of physical loveliness. We use the word forms in the widest sense of embracing modifications of sound and color, that the soul seeks the realization of the dreams of beauty, and is in her demand, in this sense especially, that the poet who is wise will most frequently and most earnestly respond. The Children of the Lord's Supper is beyond doubt a true and most beautiful poem in great part, while in some particulars it is too metaphysical to have any pretension to the name. We have already objected briefly to its meter, the ordinary Latin and Greek hexameter, dactyls and spondees at random with a spondee in conclusion. We maintain that the hexameter we can never be introduced into our language from the nature of the language itself. The rhythm demands an English ear, a preponderance of natural spondees. Our tongue has few. Not only does the Latin and Greek with the Swedish and some others abound in them, but the Greeks and Roman ear had become reconciled to the reception of artificial spondees, that is to say, the spondaic words formed partly of one word and partly of another, or of an excised part of one word. In short, the ancients have content to read as they scanned, or nearly so. It may be safely prophesied that we shall never do this, and thus we shall never admit English hexameters. An attempt to introduce them, after all repeated failures of Sir Philip Sidney and others, is perhaps somewhat discreditable to the scholarship of Professor Longfellow. The Democratic Review, in saying that he has triumphed over difficulties in his rhythm. He has been deceived. It is evident by the faculty with which some of these verses may be read. In glancing over the poem, we do not observe a single verse which can be read to English ears as a Greek hexameter. There are many, however, which can be read as mere English didactic verses, such as example as the well-known lines of Byron's commencing, "Know ye the land where the cypress and myrtle." These lines, although full of irregularities, are in their perfection formed three didactyls and a censura that we could cut short in its initial verse. The review speaks of maidenhood as a poem, not to be understood, but at the expense of one more time and trouble than a song can justly claim. We are scarcely less comprised of this opinion from Mr. Langtry than we were in the condemnation of the Luck of Edenhall. Maidenhood is faulty, it appears to us, only in the score of its theme, which is somewhat didactic. It means simply simplicity itself. A maiden on the verge of womanhood, hesitating to enjoy her life, for which she has a strong appetite, through a false idea of duty, is forbidden to fear nothing, having purity of heart as her lion of Una. What Mr. Langtry's style is unfortunate peculiarity in Mr. Longfellow, resulting from adherence to the false system, has really always been regarded as one of us, of his idiosyncratic merits. In each poem, says the critic, he has but one idea, which in the progress of his song is gradually unfolded and at least reaches its full development in the concluding lines. The singleness of thought might lead a harsh critic to suspect intellectual harshness. It leads us individually only to a full sense of the artistical power and knowledge of this poet. We confess that now, for the first time, we hear a unity of conception objected to as a defect, but Mr. Langtry seems to have fallen into the singular error of supposing the poet to have absolutely of one idea in each of his ballads. Yet how one idea can be gradually unfolded without other ideas is to us a mystery of mysteries. Mr. Longfellow very properly had put one leading idea which forms the basis of his poem, but to the aid and development of this, there one of the innumerable others, of which the rare excellence is, we are all in keeping, that none would be well omitted, and each tends to one general effect. It is necessary to say another word upon this topic. In speaking of Excelsior, Mr. Langtry, are we wrong to attributing the notice of his forcible pen seems to labor upon the similar misconceptions? It carries along with it, he says, a false moral which greatly diminishes its merit to our eyes. We need only to refer to the compositions of Flaxman and Reach. We here are detailed or omitted, nothing can be further from truth. Without even color, the most thrilling effects are produced. In statues, we are rather pleased than disguised with the want of the eyeball. The hair of the Venus de Medici was gilded. Truth indeed. The grapes of Jesus were well as the curtains of Paratheus, as received as indisputable evidence of the truthful ability of these artists, but they are not even classed among their pictures. The truth of the highest aim of either painting or poesy, then Jan Steen was a great artist than Angelo, and Crabbe is more notable poet than Milton, but we have not quoted the observations of Mr. Langtry to deny its philosophy or design was simply to show that he was misunderstood the poet. Excelsior was not even a remote tendency to the interpretation assigned by the critic. It depicts the earnest upward impulse of the soul, an impulse not to be subdued even in death, despising danger, resisting pleasure of youth, bearing the banner inscribed Excelsior. Higher still, struggles through all difficulties in an alpine summit, warned to be content with the elevation attained. His cry is still Excelsior. And even in falling dead on the highest pinnacle, his cry is still Excelsior. Yet there is yet an immoral height to be surmounted, and ascend to eternity. The poet holds in view the idea of never-ending progress. That he is misunderstood is rather a misfortune of Mr. Langtry and the fault of Mr. Longfellow. This is an old adage about the difficulty of one's furnishing an auditor with matter to be comprehended and brains for its comprehension. That's the end of Longfellow's Ballads. We will say goodbye today, and God bless all the children, and like and subscribe, and have a nice day.